All right. Welcome, everyone, to Uprising 1113 on Hacktivism. So the topic could not be more current. Cover stories every day, front page, above the fold. But of course, the kind of hacking that we're reading about right now is a little bit different than the kind of hacking that I had in mind when about 8 months ago we were planning this 1313 series on uprisings. And you know, back then I was thinking, right, you know, and this is what we're going to do. I mean, we're going to investigate kind of hacker culture and the history and what it's like today, and from the early days and through the early Assange period, the denial of service attacks and whatnot. But of course, today when we're reading about hacking in the paper, it seems as if what we've got more of is kind of government hacking, right? There's questions about the Russian hacking, and we've got the commercial hacking, right, with Cambridge Analytica, kind of misappropriating the Facebook data and lying and finding ways to get all of our personal information. And it's somewhat jarring to think about these two different phenomena, it seems to me, because they are in tension, and yet they have a lot in common, right? And I think it raises a key question for us, or perhaps what it does is it really crystallizes the question that we have today. The question which is, in what way is hacking a form of resistance? Okay? In what way is it a modality of revolt? And in relationship to that question is, does it have a particular political valence? Now, it did for a long time, and still does. It still does. And so there is a sense in which hackers and hacking in the hacker community, it remains still associated, although, as Gabriella Coleman notes in her article that we read for today, there's nuances, but still there's a kind of an association with a certain kind of anarchist, possibly anarchist, or sometimes libertarian, leftist, radical associations. But the question is, so now with all of these other forms of hacking, is there a sense in which the hacking as a mode of resistance is changing identity, or losing identity, or being less identified? And could it mean that we're going to actually start thinking about hacking more as a technology now, as a weapon, as a tool, than as a political identification, or a political, an intervention with a particular political bent to it? So those are some of the questions I think we need to explore, because the world seems to be changing a little bit in this context. And so to help us consider these questions, we are extraordinarily fortunate to have 4 brilliant hackers, scholars, and activists who are going to present and help us think through these questions. And as always, we're going to go in alphabetical order, and we're going to start with Gabriella Coleman, who is on the screen on the left over there. Hi, Gabriella. Gabriella holds the Wolf Chair in Scientific and Technological Literacy in the Department of Art History and Communication Studies at McGill University. And she is trained as a cultural anthropologist at the University of Chicago, and she researches, writes, and teaches on computer hackers and digital activism. She's the author of 2 books, Coding Freedom, The Ethics and Aesthetics of Hacking from 2012, and we've probably all read and seen Hacker, Hoaxer, Whistleblower, Spy, The Many Faces of Anonymous, which came out with Verso in 2014 and was named the Kirkus Review's one of the Kirkus Review's best books of 2014, also awarded the Diana Forsyth Prize by the American Anthropological Association. She's also a faculty associate at the Berkman Center for Internet and Society at Harvard, and so we're really thrilled, and she's going to kick us off in a few moments. After Gabriella Coleman, we will hear from Emmanuel Goldstein, AKA, I think, Eric Gordon Corley, actually. It's not, I don't think, it goes the other way around now. You know, I think, you know. But mostly referred to by his pen name of Emmanuel Goldstein from the brilliant George Orwell book, 1984, that you must all know and love. So he's a member of the hacker community, and he directs the nonprofit organization 2600 Enterprises, and he publishes the magazine called 2600, which I see we have a copy here. And this is the Hacker Quarterly. And it's also online, so you should you can get it both in print or online, and so start reading, right? Emmanuel is also the editor of the Best of 2600, a Hacker Odyssey, which was released in 2008, and the follow-up book also, Dear Hacker, Letters to the Editor of 2600, which was published in 2010. And he also directed the film in 2001, Freedom Downtime. Yep. So we're really excited to have you here too.
Glad to be here.
And then joining us from Spain on the right side of the screen, and it's a little bit later there, so you might, so we're going to try and keep Simona Levi awake with interesting conversation here. Simona Levi organizes platforms in order to bring corruption to light and to unmask those who are politically responsible for the economic injustices in Spain and Europe. Simona Levi is the founder of XNET, and there's information about that on our website. And also 15M Parato, which led, and their work led to the trial of the chief executives of Bankia, and hopefully she'll tell us a little bit about that when she comes online, and that was the 5th largest bank in Spain. She's a prominent participant in the 15M, which is the anti-austerity movement in Barcelona, and was active in housing rights movements and for the use of public spaces. She's co-author of several books, notable amongst which is Technopolitics, the Internet and Evolutions. How do we say that?
I can say it in Spanish,
yeah,
not
yeah.
in English.
Yeah.
Revolución.
Okay.
Evolución.
All right. And so that's about the key role of digital networks in the 15M movement. And she's also edited Free Digital Culture, Basic Notions of Defending What Belongs to Everyone. And they were published in 2012. And since 2017, she has designed and directed the Pompeu Fabra University's master's degree program, Civil Rights, Technopolitics, and Digital Culture, Common Goods, Democracy, and Communication in the Information Age. So after they make their short presentations, then we will hear from our own Manan Ahmed, who joins us, and we're deeply grateful. He's a professor of history here at Columbia University. He's published Where the Wild Frontiers Are, Pakistan and American Imagination, 2011, and A Book of Conquest, The Chachnama and Muslim Origins in South Asia, with Harvard Press in 2016. He's the co-founder of the Group for Experimental Methods in the Humanities at Columbia, and his work in digital history focuses on spatial and textual understandings of medieval past. And a recent collaborative project of his is Delivering Post by Foot in Medieval North India. He's also guiding the manuscripts of the Muslim World Digitization Project, and he's a founder of the South Asia blog Chapati Mystery. So, without any further, let's turn to Gabriella Coleman, and thanks for joining us, and despite your flu.
Okay, great. Well, thanks very much, Bernard, and it is really wonderful to be able to participate in this series. The question of hacker politics and the relationship between hacker politics and social movements is something that's very near and dear to my heart. I've also am very kind of honored to be able to converse with Emmanuel and Simona as well, who are just such important kind of figures in the hacker world. And I appreciate your opening, Bernard, because these are interesting, weird times when it comes to computer hacking. It seems like even though computer hacking, whether it's on political terms or economic terms, have long mattered, there's something about the intensification of the hacker as a figure since 2010, which has been really prominent. So I thought I would start by saying that I really also enjoyed the prompt of the whole series, which is asking to take seriously whether there's different modalities of politics depending on different groups of people and regions. And in some ways, the prompt of 1313 really segues, I think, quite nicely into the piece that I recommended, which was a piece called From Internet Farming to Weapons of the Geek for Current Anthropology. And I wrote it before I knew of the series, but the series in many ways, the framing is the framing of my piece in relation to computer hacking. And I'm not going to go into a deep summary of the piece, although I will refer to some of the, I think, main points that I'd like to bring on the table to help orient our discussion. But just for those that didn't have a chance to read it, one of the questions that I was motivated by was precisely whether the craft of hacking, what hackers did in terms of working with computers and programming, and what I call the craftiness of hacking, a kind of tendency to engage in humor and rule breaking, whether these had any bearing in the shape and form of hacker politics. And also, the other kind of question that I was interested in asking is why do we tend to see a large number of computer hackers who tend to be very socially and economically privileged? Why do we tend to see such a large number of them engaging in different forms of politics? And why have we seen an intensification in hacker politics from 2010? And again, there's long been hacker politics, but I would say that the hacker became geopolitically significant in 2010 in a new way. So to start, I'm going to rewind a little bit with some personal biography to address why do I even study hackers. I often get the question, which is why, as an anthropologist in 1998, 99, do you decide to study hackers? Was someone in your family a hacker? Did you have a relationship to computers? Were your parents into computing? And I was actually blissfully ignorant of computer hackers in the late 1990s. I'm not even sure I knew the term hacker whatsoever. It was not part of my mental map. But one of the things I was quite committed to and interested in at the time was questions of healthcare and healthcare access. And some of you might remember that in the late 1990s, there were some very, very big battles in Brazil and South Africa and other parts of the world to access AIDS medicines, which were under patents and extraordinarily expensive. So just at the moment in the late 1990s where HIV drugs were actually slowing down the epidemic in the West, they were inaccessible in much of the world because of patents. And this is something that I followed politically very closely, I cared quite a bit about. And then some of my friends who were computer programmers took me aside and said, well, if you have problems with patents, you might want to know about something called the Copyleft, which is a class of licenses that free software developers use in order to free software instead of close it under copyrights and patents. Software is a bit interesting because it falls under both patents and copyright. And at the time, I was just completely blown away. I was completely floored, not only because there were geeks and hackers who were committed to alternative licensing, it was in operation. Here was this license or a suite of licenses that was being used by thousands and thousands of hackers all over the world in such a way that really provided a fundamental challenge to the logic of intellectual property law. And it was at that point that I was intrigued and kind of switched over to this topic in graduate school, because it was very counterintuitive to me to understand why it is that a bunch of engineers would go down this legal route in order to, in their case, provide access. But then it became the grounds to kind of inspire other groups of people to do the same. So that was back in '98. I did my dissertation work on this. I kind of wrote a book. I was very intrigued at the time by kind of hacker politics. And again, there have always been very strong cases of hackers working with social movements, fighting for social justice, but they tended to be a little bit more marginal. You tended to have hackers who were fighting for their productive freedom. They tended to fight for free speech, privacy. And then in 2010, everything exploded, whereby hacking again really entered the global stage in a new way, in part thanks to WikiLeaks and Anonymous. There was a new kind of visibility and force to hacking. And I started to work on Anonymous, and they're very interesting, and I could say many things about them, but I'm not going to. But what I did in the piece that some people read was take stock of the last 25 years of hacker politics, and again, try to come up with a sense of, again, why is this space unique? Why do we see so many hackers, both in the past and in the present, taking action, and then what has changed to help explain the intensification? So just for my last 5 minutes or so, how much, do you know when I started, Bernard?
You started at 30, but so you got 7 minutes or so. We're
Okay.
doing good.
So some of the things that I highlighted to try to kind of explain the material and sociological and cultural conditions that help us explain, I would say, the resources that enable hacker politics. One has to do with the existence of autonomous spaces among hackers. By this I mean they build their own infrastructure. They have things like mailing lists or internet relay chat or hacker conferences that are really autonomous from the places of, let's just say, work, that gives them a kind of independent space. This kind of also has combined with independent autonomous habits of thinking, which I don't think are inherently political. And in a certain way, this kind of commitment to critical independent thinking can be simply ideological, but I actually think that given the fact that there are autonomous spaces, given that this is a value that is talked about, that is revered, I do think it has some teeth to it. So I think that's another element. I also think another factor in the hacker world that helps kind of explain a certain turn to the political is a comfort with rule breaking as well. Historically, there's a lot of rule breaking and hacking. There's a comfort even with law breaking. That's not quite the same thing. But these are three different elements: autonomous spaces of interacting, autonomous ways of thinking, a craftiness, a willingness to break rules, but then combined with a lot of state crackdowns, especially in the context of the United States, has kind of created the basis for a pretty politicized hacker movement. And it'd be interesting to think about whether, and this is more US-centric, whether in the absence of those state crackdowns, whether we would have had, such a kind of robust form of hacker politics. So those are some of the kind of shared attributes that I think exist. But I also think it's really important to emphasize that hacker politics comes in many different shapes and sizes. For way too long, I think this is no longer the case, but for way too long, there was sort of this idea that hacker politics at root is libertarian. And by libertarian, I take that to mean being against the states and being for civil liberties and being for the free markets. And certainly those hackers exist, but I would say there's a confusion between a commitment to civil liberties, where many hackers do believe in privacy, they do believe in free speech, but that doesn't mean that they're libertarian. That commitment to civil liberties has then been bound up with projects that are purely about civil liberties. I just got back from the Tor developer meeting, and Tor is an anonymity project, and that's squarely about civil liberties. Other projects, like the ones that Simona and Levi have been involved in, are so not libertarian. They often really are directed at questioning capitalism and are about social justice, right? So regionalism really matters. And I think it's really, really important to keep that in mind. But for many years, I would argue, no, not all hacker politics are libertarian, and people just generally wouldn't take them very seriously. And then again, hacker politics come in many different forms. It's about suing bankers. It's about creating technology tools. It's about working on policy. It's about hacking into servers and taking information. It's about engaging in trademark disputes, as 2600 has done. It's actually quite remarkable that even while technology and law are the bread and butter of hacker politics, that you could really find many different types of interventions as well. Now that said, I also think one of the things that I have found really fascinating about many different types of hacker politics is that while some hacker groups that are very politically oriented police their boundaries in very explicit ways, so a political group like Rise Up, which provides alternative infrastructure for social justice activists around the world, they're not going to let anyone into their collective unless you're on the same political page as they are, right? This is a leftist project. People know each other. There's only like 10 collective members. And there's many projects, especially in Europe, that are oriented in that kind of tightly configured way. But what's also remarkable is that I have found there have been many projects in the hacker world with a high degree of what I call political intersectionality, where there's not so much a concern with your ideological commitment. You may be liberal, you may be left, you may be libertarian, but they all come together because they want to create an anonymity tool, or in the case of Anonymous, which was configured very similarly, there was, again, a commitment to anonymity and fighting injustice, but it allowed different groups of people with different political orientations to work together. And this, again, is something that I've seen with many different hacker projects, and I think this is actually very valuable within limits. You know, if you have raging fascists and Nazis, no thank you, you're not allowed to enter. And even these projects that tend to have a high latitude for political difference have their limits. So that's something that has always kind of fascinated me, and I think that is important, and it's an interesting question whether it's distinctive to the hacker world. So just to finish now, I mean, I do think that while currently in the news, we have news about the state-sponsored hackers engaging in very dubious hacks on behalf of governments or even extremely dubious companies like Cambridge Analytica. We just had, heard the news about the hacking that was done on behalf of them. I do think that we are in a place where hackers have contributed in incredibly important and in positive ways to the political landscape. I mean, if you think about Cambridge Analytica, again, because that's in the news, we wouldn't actually even have strong encryption tools for people like Signal, like Tor, like PGP, if it were not for hackers. They're the ones who have led, basically, the development of these tools. And while these tools are not going to save us in any significant way from surveillance capitalism, of which Cambridge Analytica is just one small example, nevertheless, I am glad I am in a world where there's at least these tools. right? And that a group of people have, over the course of 20 years, but especially in the last 10 years and especially in the last 5 years post-Snowden, have been really committed to creating these tools and fighting for these sorts of values that otherwise are under such threat. And I think while there's been a very robust sphere of hacker politics, historically and currently, there's no reason to believe that will exist in the future. Very briefly, I think Silicon Valley entrepreneurial culture is a big threat. It's one of the reasons why, while obviously there's political hackers in the Bay Area, that's not really the sensibility there. You work too hard and all your energies are directed towards companies, whether it's the Facebooks or startup culture. And there's very, very troubling trends in certain technological sectors where you have the alt-right, where there's not necessarily hackers who are, well, there's a few hackers who are involved, but it's not so much a hacker movement, but it is a kind of tech-oriented movement. Steve Bannon has just declared today that the 3 pillars of his new ideology are nationalism, cryptocurrencies, and digital sovereignty. And most disturbing is the dark enlightenment kind of philosophy that is marginal, but a little bit, growing popularity in Silicon Valley, where tech types, hacker types, really believe that certain ideals that were part of the Enlightenment, like democracy, were a mistake, and we should go back to a kind of European order. And so I am concerned about the future of hacker politics and their viability, given both the threats that come in the form of state crackdowns, come in the form of Silicon Valley culture, or really, really regressive fascist kind of movements that embrace technology. So I'll just leave it there. There was a lot there, but I look forward to talking about many other issues.
All right. Thanks, Gabriella, for spelling out some of these ways in which the politics are changing and the threats even to hacker culture. That was really fascinating. I think we'll come back a little bit to notions of libertarianism, because I think that there are different stripes of libertarianism, and I think that the one you were referring to was more the right leaning kind of property-oriented Richard Epstein or Liberty Fund libertarianism, but there are other left-leaning forms of libertarianism that I think might be reflected more or in some of the hacker culture. So we'll come back to some of these themes, but next we've got Emmanuel Goldstein.
Okay. Great. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Well, I think Gabriella really hit it on the head with the political intersectionality. That's something that we've been dealing with for decades, where basically we're told that we're libertarian, and then we're told that we're socialist, and we're told that we're Democrats, and every possible label you could imagine. And in actuality, hackers represent a huge, diverse group of people. Sometimes it's right-wing, sometimes it's left-wing, sometimes we disagree, and that's simply the way the culture has evolved. We've certainly seen a lot of what we call hacktivism in resistance to the status quo. And I think there's a reason why it happens in a particular fashion against a particular type of governance. And that's simply because the creative people are the ones who generally stand up against that. And when the more status quo-oriented type people aren't in power, I don't think they have the imagination to figure out ways to subvert the system. So they wind up doing things like denial of service attacks, which we can get into later, and ask ourselves if that really is a true form of hacktivism. But let me go back a little bit to our beginnings, because we've struggled with words forever. Hackers have always had this debate within the community.
Go ahead. Maybe just a teeny bit, but keep on going.
Okay. People have said that there are the good hackers and then there are the bad hackers. In fact, there was a movement dating back to the 80s where bad hackers would be called crackers. Good hackers would retain the hacker name. That struck us as kind of ridiculous, because then if you have this large group of people known as crackers, because they're just a bunch of wise guy kids that break into computers and don't follow the rules, you call somebody a cracker, that's the end of the story. You never find out what it is they actually are doing. However, if you call somebody a hacker, then you want to know more. You want to know what it is they're up to, what they got into, what kind of information they've been sharing. And so that's why that kind of labeling seemed kind of self-defeating. And no one's ever used the word cracktivism as far as I know, so I think we've gotten past that. But as far as when activism and hacking merged, I think that happened almost the moment the term hacker came into being, because all you need is a sense of injustice, a sense of not being treated fairly. And I think hackers, all the way back to day one, can say, yeah, I haven't been treated fairly, because hackers are looked upon with suspicion, whether you figure out a way to get access to the mainframe computer for a period of time you weren't allowed to back in the 1960s, or whether you're...
Keep on going.
Am I done? Okay.
Go ahead.
Or whether whether hackers are breaking into websites or leaking information, all manner of ways that hackers have been looked upon with suspicion. There's also, what if I hit the push button?
I don't know, let's try that one.
Okay. Is this a better one?
I don't know, sometimes these things are money.
Is this system on the internet by any chance? All right. I can just talk loud, too.
You can talk loud. Keep on going, keep on going.
So basically, hackers have always been looked upon with hostility, with suspicion by the people in charge. We've gotten so many stories from high school kids who were punished simply for either asking questions or for proving that they know more than their teacher as far as computers. People in control really resent being questioned, and that goes for teachers, parents, system operators, or people in government. Nothing is more annoying than a group of smart people asking questions if you're running something and you want to stay in control. So basically, this is something that we're familiar with at 2600. We've seen evolve over the years. But for the most part, at the beginning, the actual messages being sent out from hackers wasn't really political in nature. Reason being, a lot of them were kids. A lot of people didn't see the connection between playing with computers, playing with phones, and serious messages involving justice and equality, freedom. You had things like the Captain Midnight episode, which didn't really involve computers. It involved the guy who was angry that HBO was charging free-to-air satellite users. And so he took over the airing of a film called The Falcon and the Snowman in 1986 and put up a message saying, no way are we going to pay this amount every month. And it was national news, international news. People had no idea that this was even possible, but this guy had gotten on, overpowered the uplink out in Long Island, and basically gotten his message across. It was a form of activism. It was a very small form. It was a very selfish form because it was just basically addressing his complaint. But it showed that, yes, you can piggyback onto technology and get your message out there. We hadn't yet seen that happen in a very large capacity. Now, you also had instances going back even further to the phone freaks of the 1960s. There was this one story in particular, and I got this out of Phil Lapsley's Exploding the Phone, which is a great book to read if you ever get the chance to. All kinds of stories about the early phone freaks who, for all intents and purposes, are hackers. They play with a massive system known as the Ma Bell system. There used to be only one way to make phone calls in this country, and the phone freaks knew how to manipulate that system. It wasn't just about making free phone calls, it was about learning how it all worked and sharing that information, something that Ma Bell did not want people to be able to do. And also figuring out that their system kind of didn't work right, that there was nothing they could do to prevent people from using blue boxes to route calls to anywhere they wanted to. There was nothing preventing people from using red boxes. Some of you might be familiar with red boxes. Basically, the brilliant minds who designed the system of payphones had 5 beeps mean a quarter. 2 beeps mean a dime. 1 beep would mean a nickel. And somebody came up with the brilliant idea, what if I just record the beeps and play that into the mouthpiece? And guess what? That worked. That was a quarter as far as the phone company was concerned. And they had to basically redesign their entire system to get past that. And that took decades. So that was the kind of thing that hackers were revealing, phone phreaks were revealing. But there was this one case where a bunch of very early phone phreaks somehow found out that President Richard Nixon's secret name was basically Olympus. That's right. His name was Olympus. They had an 800 number that routed to the White House. And the person answering that phone was instructed to get Olympus. They actually brought Richard Nixon to the phone, where they told him that we have a crisis in Los Angeles. And the voice, which sounded very much like Richard Nixon, wanted to know what the crisis was. We're out of toilet paper, sir. At which point he demanded to know who they were. They hung up and had a good laugh. This was the kind of thing that inspired people like Steve Wozniak, because he was friends with these people, and he would go on to sell blue boxes, build blue boxes, and kind of bring this sense of mischief and rebellion to the table. Now, again, we're seeing this was kind of a selfish act, just for their own amusement. Nothing really of import was communicated. Certainly could have been. We started to get into that more in the 1990s. Speaking personally, I went to the State University at Stony Brook, and we were involved in some level of mischief on various levels. One of which, in the days before desktop publishing, involved sending out fake memos, reportedly from the university or from university offices. And since there was no desktop publishing, we literally had to cut and paste with glue and scissors. And then using the intra-campus mail system, piggybacking onto that system, we sent out a notice announcing that something that we thought was unfair, namely New York Telephone's charging of a rental fee to students for a month that they were on vacation, that was being abolished. We announced that. We sent it to all the campus newspapers. It was printed, it became news. And New York Telephone had to actually go out and deny that they were going to issue a refund for that month when nobody was using their phones. And they were very upset, but we had gotten the message out using the infrastructure to basically communicate that in ways we couldn't have done on our own. This is something similar to what the Yes Men have done in recent years. I don't know how many of you have seen the fake Dow Chemical website that they put together. Dow was basically the owner. I'll just hold both mics here. No, this happens to me all the time in technology. It's like the demonic kid going into church, everything freaks out. So basically, what they did was they took over the Dow. Well, they didn't take over the Dow website. People assumed they were running the Dow website. They basically did a slight misspelling or just added a word, and people believed it, the media believed it, and they announced that they were going to compensate all the victims of the Bhopal chemical disaster. Actually, that's not entirely true. At first, they basically said, we are not going to give them anything, and there was a big uproar about that. And so Dow Chemical had to respond to that, saying, hey, that wasn't us, we didn't say that. That's what we mean, but we didn't say that. And then Andy Bickelbaum, was one of the Yes Men, used that leverage to actually get onto BBC as a Dow Chemical spokesperson, because they believed what they were reading from the fake website. And so he went on to BBC and announced that, in fact, we've thought about it, and yes, we're going to compensate the victims handsomely. And so Dow Chemical then had to again say, no, we're not going to do that, and look really terribly bad in front of everybody. Now, did the victims get compensated? No. It was a horrible reminder of what had happened in years prior. But the message was gotten out, and people were talking about it, and that is what was important as far as raising awareness. That, to me, is a great example of what hacktivism can be. It doesn't have to involve computers. It certainly can, and with computers, with technology, with our current method of doing things, we can reach so many more people. With social media being able to to reveal information and get it to the right people. That is something, that is a power we did not have before. Now, at 2600, we've been told many times that politics is not for us, that we should just stick to the exploits and reveal security problems and things like that. But in this world, it's impossible to avoid. Now, we try not to take sides consistently, where we say, yes, we support this particular political candidate or this particular political party. We support concepts of freedom, of equality, of giving people a voice. And that's why we have different voices speaking out in our magazine. That's why you'll see pro-Trump people telling us that we're full of crap. And we print that and we respond to it and we have a conversation. And I think that is what is important. That is what actually leads to understanding. I think a lot of the hacker world gets that and values that. Now, there is a flip side to this. For instance, back in 2001, April 1st, 2001, there was an incident where an American spy plane crashed into a Chinese naval plane and was trapped in China for a while. We received hundreds of emails advising us, encouraging us to hack the Chinese, to shut them down, and basically use the techniques that I don't really think is hacktivism, basically just drowning somebody out where they can't communicate at all. It seems that's a way that you communicate when you've run out of ideas, when you've run out of talking points. Every single one of these messages, and this is not an exaggeration, every single one was traced back to a military address in the United States military. This was their idea of activism, and this goes back to what I was saying before about how particular sides just don't have the imagination to subvert the system. They just want to shut down the opposition. And that's something that I don't want to see the people I agree with fall into. I want to see people debate the issues and explain why it is they are right, why they're correct, why their viewpoint should be heard. And that's something that we have seen quite a bit of, especially in recent years. When so much information has been leaked, so much information has been revealed, and the importance of being a hacker, being somebody who questions, being somebody who investigates and shares the information that they find, that is something that I think more people are realizing now. Hacking, people say hacking is in the headlines now. Hacking has always been in the headlines. It's the technology that has changed. In 1983, I remember the year before our magazine came out, War Games came out, and hacking was in the headlines then. People were talking about launching missiles by computer. People were talking about kids hacking into schools and changing their grades. And ever since then, it's been a nonstop dialogue of hacking either being over, the good old days are gone, or hacking being the way that we make change. I think hacking has morphed into hacktivism. It's something that we're going to see grow, develop with every form of technology. As long as we have a sense of what social justice is, the right people will come to the table and use those tools of technology to get their message out and to give a voice to the people that until now have not been heard.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, that was terrific, and the historical perspective is really helpful also in trying to kind of make some sense of this. Okay, so let's go to Simona Levi in Barcelona.
Hi, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I get my voice back, so it's gonna be a bit trouble for me. But okay, thank you very much to all of you. I am here with my pajama because it's quite late, but I will add some complexity to my presentation in remote because it will be held, my presentation, in creative English. So please, if you don't understand what I'm saying, really, you stop me and I try to explain it with better words. So I am not a theorist, I am not a researcher, and I must say that I am not an hacker either, so I hope you don't get too deceived and ask for your money back. But in my group, I'm not the one who is taking care of the coding. It's another girlfriend that is in coding. What I do, I'm more an activist, a strategist that use technology, and most of all, I am a tango dancer. So I cannot really offer a kind of a theoretical overview on what we do, but I hope I can offer some case of study and some example on some examples, so that I would like to share some note of the method that we use to structure our daily action, and I hope this is useful for the discussion and is also useful for your daily action. So let's say that what I have kind of designed is a method of work that have led to some pretty successful action in the last 10 years. The base of the method is greatly inspired by the hacker philosophy and the hacker methodology. And I have tried to adapt this to the sphere of political action, of social justice, of fight for democracy, particularly from anti-corruption, but also to the political parties. We have found, for example, a political party called Party X that had won 100,000 votes in the last European election. For you, this is not much, but for Europe and for us, it's 1/3 of what you need to win. So it was quite it was an experiment. I also tried to translate the hacker philosophy and methodology to the structure of the institution, and is, for me, as was just said before, is an idea of turning upside down in a situationistic idea, the situationistic idea of the tournement, to turn upside down the stereotype of the political action, especially the leftist political action. I think on that, hearing the previous intervention, the idea of the left and right in Europe are much more very structured and historically stiff structure, which is very problematic. And I think it's a bit different of what you of your categories. But so I will speak more from of course European point of view. So basically the method is the idea of asking why, and the result of that. I also have to say that my group, we are between three and 5. Today, for example, we are 3. Other day we are 5. So it is a very small group, but with a very big network. So we are really working in a network with the many other reality. It is part of the idea of the work. And so as a result of the application of this methodology, for example, we have opened a court case against almost 100 politicians and bankers in Spain. We have opened it in the sense that we are the persecutors. So we have leaked information, we have found the victim, we have leaked the information, we have crowdfunded the money, and we have opened the court case, and using a figure, hacking the juridical system in Spain, we have used a figure, and we are the persecutor. So we appear in the trial from different angle, and also so this is one trial. I think some of these people you know, at least Mr. Rodrigo Rato, because he was the former president of the IMF, and he was Minister of Economy in Spain, and he was the future Prime Minister of Spain. So in 2012, we stopped his political career, and now he has been condemned to 4 years jail, and we are waiting. We have asked 15 more, and all this we have, and this is applying, creating a device, as we call it. We call it the open source jailing bankers device, and because it's really a device that then we try to reply in other circumstances. This month, for example, we have opened another court case using the same technique against the president of the Real Madrid. If some of you like football, you might know Real Madrid. I don't like football, but it's important. You know, Real Madrid is important. So the president is also the more important housing builder in Spain, and we had the same housing problem you had in the US that crashed the economy. In Spain, the economy is based only in construction. So this guy is the main guy, and 5 ministers. And as I say, I really don't like the category left and right. So I always try to have in my court cases people from the Conservative Party and people from the Democratic Party in order to be more fair. So now with the Mr. Of the Real Madrid, we also have involved 5 ministers, 2 from the left and 3 from the right. And so this is a bit what we do when we don't dance tango. And so I want to go back a bit more about this idea of methodology, because linked to this, we always do 2 things. First of all, we think that what happened as name of people. So this guy is not just the economy, the bank, the politics, is a guy. In this case, 100 guys. In the other case, 6 guys. So we try to look to humanize the fraud. The fraud is not a mystery of the nature. Is something that people does. And also we try to get the victim paid. In this case, we get back the money for 300,000 people, and we got back 2 billion euros to the people. So all the victims of this bank, which was and is the 4th bank in Spain, they've lost all this money. I just said they got all of them. They get their money back, except the other banks, let's say. So this is a bit. This is the idea of the open source jailing banker device, which I invite you to reply. So what I want to let's say picture is that when we open a campaign, we work on different directions. In this case, the direction is always the action direct side, but also the judicial, also the ruling. So we change legislation. Also, we get the victim to stop being a victim, because we don't want victims. But also we work on the mainstream communication side, so do theater play, teach shows, big mainstream, and not small theater, big theater, books. So we try really to make very pop and mainstream the open source jailing. This is the open source side of the jailing banker device. And our motto is evil triumph, but good progress. So to be sure that we don't get too deceived of the result. Huh? So I'd like to bring in just 4 points really of the methodology. The methodology has a structure of 13 points, but I think there is 4 main points that can be useful. First of all, as point 0, I think in this right moment, especially also with what is happening to you and to us, that there is the dark side is coming quite strong lately. In Spain particularly, we are facing a very heavy cut of freedom of expression. in this right moment where I'm speaking to you, they are putting in jail again a part of the Catalan government. We are now in a very problematic period, and so I think in this kind of moment in which we have got the energy of big movement like the Occupy in your case, and in our case the International movement, which is a moment in which you get the energy for the fight, but then there is other moment in which we have to go to catalyze this energy in small groups. So for me now, the energy and the structure that we have to use are structure more like guerrilla or scientific community, not the shape of a social movement. I think in this moment there's more room with the private research, very private research, but open and share result are the structure that can be efficient to change, to transform reality. So I bring in this very few point. Of course, from a European perspective, they can be used differently, useful for you. The first one is we don't work around the ideology. And this is maybe for you is not very strange or special, but in Europe, yes. In Europe, you are always or from left or from right. You cannot find that Podemos, you know Podemos?
Yeah.
Is a political party from Spain. It's very important. I'm the main representative of the people that hate Podemos. And it's very important because we are very few, and I am kind of the spokesperson for all of us, because every time I give a conference, I have to say that Podemos is a fraud, and it's important because this information doesn't cross the border. So when I give international conference, in some point of the conference, I have to say, so this is the one. Podemos is a fraud. Okay, so so we don't work around ideology. I mean, in Europe it's important because you get put in a box, and in this box you cannot move. Normally you get put in a box by Podemos. So in this box you cannot move, and you cannot create a different kind of network. The network you need to change, to solve a particular, very concrete problem. So we don't work around ideology, we work around methodology. And because methodology is working with what you have, what really exists, while working on with ideology, ideology becomes more a goal, and is, for me, it's a work around wishes. So it's a very inefficient starting point. I think ideology should be, it's a tool. Each of us, we have our own ideology. So ideology is a tool of work, but it cannot be at all a common ground of agreement. I think this is something that is very important in the hackers and online community I work with, that you never ask someone that come and work with you on a concrete problem, for example, jailing bankers. You never ask him about his ideology. You talk about what we have to do now. So the ideology is your tool of work, but it's not something you have to agree upon. And in order to function this way, we respect the law of 1990. Maybe you know it is the law of potency. It's the law of 1990, which basically say that in every human structure, human group, there is always a 1% that leads, a 9% that support the leading group, and a 90% which is following or just observing. And this is very important to know that everything, all the thing happen like this, because most of the, at least the leftist European action is say that, okay, here we are not 1 million, we just cannot do anything. So this is why we never do anything, because we are never 1 million. So with this way of work, you often work alone, and you feel very happy and big and many, because you know that you are the 1% of a structure in any case. So that to be through is not a problem. And also because this helps us to work not in a vertical way. We think that vertical organization, of course, are oppressive and doesn't work, but we also think that horizontal organization are not working because they are not real, because reality is 1990. So what we think is real is a network of distributed leadership in nodes composed by structure 1990. 1% leading, 9% supporting the leader that can be many people, and it's not one leader. It can be the leading group, can be 10 people, 100 people, but the leading group is 1%. The 9% is supporting this leading group, and the 90% is observing. But observing, for example, can be retweeting, can be being informed. So it's a very important part of this. And in any moment of our life, we are part of or the 1% or the 9% of the 90%. So it's not that there is people meant to be the 1%. We are all meant to be the 1% on some time, the 9% some other time, and the 90% in most of the time, each of us. So this makes a more realistic view of what the ground field where we are fighting. We are the of being a huge crowd, and you can get a very good result. On this matter, I have a particular good opinion on women discrimination, but I explain this at the end, because I think it's a very fashionable thing to speak about female discrimination, but for me it was always very useful in my case to be discriminated, but I come to this later on. So the second point is, no, I just say the second point, so that we don't work vertically, we don't work horizontally, we federate skills in using this structure I just say. So we are also very much against unity. This idea of unity is strength for us is absolutely fake, is not efficient. I don't think unity is strength. I think that the last one that said that unity with strength was the people that doesn't want the divorce and that have destroyed the life of many people and especially many women. So I don't think only federation is good. We cannot try to merge. We can always try to federate skills between adults, everybody co-responsible of whatever device we build together, but we are not merging ever. Yeah, to end up, the other thing that for me was a great lesson from the hacker scene is that we never start from scratch. So for me, there is this. This was said in the May '68 that to be radical, ask for the impossible. For that time, it was a very good idea because it was another time. But for me now, the slogan that I often use is be radical, ask for the possible, because we are working in system that that call themselves democracy, but they lack of democracy, of course. So this system called themselves democracy. So you should, what we always ask when we ask for social justice, for civil liberties, for freedom of expression, we ask something that should be implied in this idea of democracy. Democracy, the power for the people. So we have to ask for what is possible in a democracy, and this is very radical, at least in my experience. I have asked to put in jail the responsible for the Spanish crisis, and I've proved that this was the very radical thing to do. So really using the system, hacking the legal system, the legislative system to work as it should be supposed to work. This is the biggest hack that you can do, at least at the moment, at least in Spain, at least in Europe, that in my experience. And never start from scratch. We I think we, of course, have also to live outside of the system with other form of life, but to transform this system, which is in fact what influences our daily life in any case, we have to work and mending what is there. I always say this, especially right now with this repression in Spain, that we shouldn't we shouldn't put lines on. We should ask for what is possible by amending the reality. This is what I do when I am myself the persecutor in this not just judicial system. What we say is to make the democracy functional. So just to end on this, I think that in any case, one of the more revolutionary things, and the hacker scene worked very much on that, is to the freedom of information. So to be properly informed is a revolutionary act. It's part of a very revolutionary act. And I want to end up with the female discrimination part, because I had a lot of discussion with the feminist movement here that is also very big in this moment, like in the US. As I said, I like to work with what we have. So I always say that for me, female discrimination, in the beginning, of course, I was really pissed off to be discriminated of being a female. But when you work with this idea of working with what you have, what we have is female discrimination. And for me, it was quite good, because most of this device, I designed it myself. But I never say that was me. They were anonymous devices. For example, this Jaylee Banker's device have been anonymous during 2 years. Because if a female, not married, not kids, and not living in the capital, if she launched this device, of course, no one will take this serious. So if you launch an anonymous device, everybody thinks it's a white male from Madrid. But the face they put 2 years after, when they see that we are 3 women and 2 gay guys, have knocked down the ex-minister of economy and 80 bankers from all the political parties, even from Podemos political party, I mean, their face is marvelous. That means if you are a male white guy, you cannot get that. And another thing of female discrimination. In 2010, I say, me, a girl, will put in jail all the board of the main collecting society in Spain. And nobody believes me because I'm a girl. So I could do my work very quietly, and 2 years after they were in jail. Then two years after, I say, I will put in jail Rodrigo Rato, the future prime minister, 80 bankers, and give all the money back to everybody and bankrupt the bank. And nobody. I say this in front of 8,000 people in the main square of the Indignado movement in Barcelona. And if I would be a white male in Madrid, I would have a lot of problems, because everybody the police, everybody will come after me. But since I'm a girl, nobody takes me seriously. And the face of Rodrigo Rato, when he has been knocked down, is just beautiful. So.
Thank you, Simona. Okay, so we have some themes emerging, themes about rule breaking, comfort with rule breaking, mischief, craftiness, independent thinking. We've got a lot of things on the table. Manan, you want to start commenting?
Yes, thank you. Thank you, first of all, Bernard, for inviting me. I don't think I was in the computer science department in 91, 92, and I was using 2600 to hack beepers from photocopies that were passed around on our campus. So I could never imagine having being sitting here next to Emmanuel Goldstein. So it's an honor. And we've already heard, I think, as Bernard is saying, certain themes that have kind of organically emerged from sort of a profile of a sort of activist and hacktivist that emerges from the anthropological ethnographic work that Gabriella Coleman has been doing for a while, and the piece that you read, or some of you read, to the sort of oral history that has been provided of a particular movement and kind of flashpoints in that movement that are some legendary and some nicely forgotten. This inspiring acts of revolution, both daily revolution and what can we say, social engineering, perhaps is a good word of using that, that Simona and her team have been doing. So I wanted to kind of bring three things that will coalesce around these issues very quickly. I don't want to take time away from the conversation here. The first thing I want to put on the table sort of intersects with the profile of the hacktivist and the history of hacktivism as we have been presented here today. And I'm really thankful for Simona's sort of rejiggering of the 1968 movement slogan, "Be radical, ask for impossible," to "Be radical, ask for the possible." And if we think about anti-colonial struggle throughout the 20th century, that actually is the slogan that allowed anti-colonial movements to emerge. Because what they were asking was that under colonial law, under the laws of sort of a liberal state that was running the colony in South Asia or in Africa, what the anti-colonial movement asked was, be radical, ask for what is our right as subjects, as you legally can grant us. And so the legislature, as we're seeing, and the capitalists or the economy were the two ways in which the native, the colonized native, hacked, if we can use that term, resistance to hegemonic systems. And knowledge really is at the core of that hacking, right? The capacity of the colonizing space to fabricate a reality through which you see yourself as less than human, you see yourself as belonging to a subjugated space. And so to resist it, the resistance against it, required precisely sort of hacking the social fabric itself. I was introduced to that as a young man in Ziaul Haq's military dictatorship, and I learned computers because one of the things that I was doing as a young college student in Lahore was creating newsletters in which we were, you wouldn't believe it, we would circulate New Year's party information. Because the most radical thing we could think of doing was throw a New Year's party in a dictatorship where our Muslimness determined a type of politics where that was the most subversive act possible. And those parties were always at our professors' houses, of course. My computer science professor. And that notion of sort of social engineering in which a type of resistance coalesces through the 1% and the 9% comes back into came back to my awareness as I began to study sort of the history of colonization, and I realized that one of the ways in which structures of information were actually formed in the colony. So very, very basic structures of data that we understand as data, which is really what the two nodes of the computer are supposed to be doing, right? They're not. It's not an irrigation schema. It's not a water flowing. It's actually data being exchanged, as I think your last book also kind of worked on that premise. clearly and cleanly within the colonial context, both biometric data, fingerprinting, for example, as well as what we, in our contemporary world, kind of encircle under the guise of privacy, but really the sort of the inner being, the inner soul, right? And here the colony was extremely sort of invested in peeling back that layer. So whether it was personal law, whether it was religion, whether it was culture, all of these things were encoded and re-encoded on this campus, actually, the anthropology department here, the history department here, and of course the law school. And so, in a sense, the question of that idea of data and how do you resist that informational technology leads me to ask the question of, can we really think of hacktivism as a successful operation? Is that really a clear possibility? And some of the examples, as Emmanuel Goldstein already pointed out, kind of get to the level of mischief, get to the level of awareness. After 9/11, information actually very, very early started leaking out of Mabel's collusion with the NSA. That was a leak that happened very, very, very early after 9/11. It didn't change much. Snowden didn't really change much. WikiLeaks, that the drone attack, the footage of the drone killing that made the WikiLeaks, we didn't stop droning, right? So, how do we think about hacktivism as an attempt to engineer resistance, and how do we think of its its capacity to achieve a goal when it intersects with things like imperialism, things like colonial power directly, right? Where is the social good? Because the question of hacktivism is towards a social group, right? A social good. Freedom of speech being one key part of this. But when the social good itself is that we must win the war on Islamic terrorism, does freedom of speech come in and disrupt that? I would submit not. That's not at least the history we've gone through. On the other hand, hacktivism has toppled regimes. The example of Spain has just been given. Pakistan is another example where the current, still in power, but the political party was toppled because of the Panama leaks, because of the information provided about the types of holdings. So it does work in the colony in certain ways, right? And my own personal example, and Madiha, my colleague, is here. We worked in 2007, 2008 to topple another dictator using basically hacktivism of different sort, both online and offline. So we were able to do much, I think. But it's an open question for me as to the. So second thing I want to sort of put on the table, which is again, it comes out of the comments both Coleman and Simona Gabriella and Simona have done, which is how do we kind of understand this hacking within the disciplinary formations that we are a part of. And here the disciplinary formation, of course, is the university where this seminar is conducting, and we had several reasons to think of students, teachers, thinkers in that space. And one of the things that has changed significantly for the Global South and, in fact, the Global North has been the hacks of LibGen, Sci-Hub, and Memories of the World. These projects that have kind of brought out from paywall immense amount of knowledge that belongs to the world in really concrete terms. I know that I just conducted a digital kind of history workshop in Lahore 2 days ago. And LibGen, which, people familiar with LibGen here? Library Genesis?
Yeah.
Thank you.
You're not admitting it, are they?
It's a lifeline through which individuals can download scholarly academic work. Sci-Hub is the scientific version of it. These are both projects that came out of Eastern Europe in different forms are located in the global South in different other forms. And Memories of the World is a third project that a colleague of ours is working on. And what these projects have done is that these projects have taken out of Elsevier, JSTOR, PubMed, all these other kind of barriers to disciplinary thought, the artifacts, the artifact of knowledge itself. And so hacking the discipline, if we think about it, and I call these people, or I'm happy to refer to these people as hacktivists, has a profound effect in which the barrier to entry, which is money, right? The barrier to entry to knowledge for the global South is made possible through these. Coleman's piece actually mentioned Aaron Swartz as well. So here, what's interesting to me is that these collectives, these autonomous, semi-autonomous collectives, have done something around copyright law and around access issues, and this data is not readily available, but I can testify to it. But one of their greatest segments of users actually belongs to North American universities, right? So in other words, the regime that organizes knowledge here. So if any of your Columbia students here, you should ask the Columbia Library how much they pay to Elsevier or Taylor and Francis for their sort of subscriptions. And then you should see how many students here actually use Sci-Hub to download articles, JSTOR or otherwise. So where is the, so I want us to be kind of really be more critically aware of the geographic and spatiality of hacktivism, and then who gets to benefit and on what grounds, and where the status quo doesn't need to be readjusted because there is a solution that's coming out. And the third thing I'll just very briefly mention in the sort of rubric of hacking the discipline is a type of work that I do on this campus with my colleague Dennis Tennant, which is, as Bernard mentioned, the sort of group for experimental methods, which allows us to think of our disciplinary training as a historian or as a literary scholar or a data scientist, and introduce small programmatic sort of bits of social engineering. And one of the projects that I want to mention as in the rubric of hacktivism is a project we've been doing for the last 4 years, which is called the Rikersbot project. And in this project, we took a set of students, Columbia undergraduates, to Rikers Island, and we put them together with young people who were incarcerated at Rikers Island, and we taught the group, the Columbia and the young people who were incarcerated together very basic techniques of how to make a Twitter bot. And as part of that Twitter bot, they wrote stories about their everyday life that the Twitter, it's called @RikersBot, you can find it on Twitter, would kind of tweet out. So here, there was two types of social engineering that was happening. One was us trying to create a CB item for young people who are actually, again, it bears mentioning, the group that we worked with in 2015 specifically had been targeted under a Facebook raid, as in the New York Police Department had been monitoring Facebook pages, and then they did a mass raid in Harlem and collected these young people and put them in. So they were there because of a type of digital surveillance. To give them coding skills, give them a way of thinking about it, and then actually to raise awareness of Rikers Island on this campus. The undergraduates here don't know it exists. We truly do not know that it exists. And the social engineering actually was to have them actually go on a Saturday for 3 months and be denied entry and just be sitting outside at the bus terminal, wasting time, which is the time that every loved one who has ever wanted to visit someone at the Rikers has been forced to do for hundreds of days. So I wanted to kind of bring some of these things and kind of encapsulate there. So there are some questions and some comments. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Great, terrific comments. And so we have an original set of questions now, I think, on the table for our speakers. Some of these questions, and here's what I propose. I'll try and be brief, but I have certain thoughts I wanted to make briefly, and then maybe I'll open it up. We'll open it up to just a few more voices before we turn back to the panelists to get some reactions and some thoughts. Okay. So in addition to the points that Manan was making, but building on them, I mean, so there's one. The first point you were making is fascinating about the anti-colonial struggle as a form of hacking the system. Okay, so it's a fascinating way of thinking about it, and what it raises to me is a question about the rule breaking and the non-rule breaking that are part of hacking, and that seem to be so integral to what I would call is the temperament of the hacker. But there's this idea that in part, right, I mean, hacking the system means understanding how it works. Understanding how it works and deploying it doesn't always mean that you're breaking the rules. You're breaking some kind of norm, which is that you're not supposed to know how it works. In the same way in which, in the colonial context, you're not supposed to have those rights, so you're violating something at the same time as there is an internal play that is about following the actual rules, right? So there's something about that I find very interesting. It's understanding, learning, figuring out what the rules are, the beep on the telephone that actually gives you 25 cents, right? You're not allowed to do that, but you are doing it, and maybe you are actually, and there's nothing to stop you from doing it, right? Now there's something about that sensibility of wanting to figure out the rules in order to turn them around and to use them that seems central to the hacker personality. I'm not sure what the right word here is. Temperament?
Methodology.
Methodology, for sure, right? But there's so independent thinking, words that Gabriella Coleman had started with. You, Emmanuel, you had talked about mischief, right? Independent thinking, craftiness, mischief. These questions of rules and rule breaking, and that also Simona was talking about. I wonder if ultimately it's a temperament within a certain culture of a computer geek. I mean, not all computer geeks are necessarily going to have this temperament. Many of them will simply be coders that will not hack, right?
Right.
And isn't it interesting that there's a similarity there also with the protest movement, for instance, Occupy Wall Street. So, and Simona was talking about that, and Indignados and other movements. There's nothing that should necessarily rapprocher Occupy Wall Street from hacking, right? I mean, Occupy Wall Street was a physical occupation of a space. It didn't need to have hacking in any way, and whatever part. And yes, there were people with the anonymous mask, but it wasn't. There's no necessary relationship, except there's an affinity somehow. It seems. I mean, there's an affinity. And I'm just wondering if that affinity also is a temperament of learning the rules to want to try and change them in a way that you're not supposed to, or something like that.
You don't have to have access to technology.
Try this one.
First microphone. You don't have to have access to technology to have the hacker spirit. And I think what you saw with Occupy Wall Street was the hacker spirit in physical form, where there was no hierarchical structure. There was a lot of discussion and debate, questioning of authority, questioning of rules, without really knowing what the end goal was. And I think that also speaks to the question as to whether or not we can say hacktivism is successful. I think hacktivism is a process. I think it's how you get someplace. And I think hackers, as a rule, don't assume they know the answer is what the end goal is going to be, but rather, here is my contribution to the entire process. And
Let me give you that.
It's my voice, isn't it?
But this one, you can have that one too.
But everyone makes their own contribution in one way or another, and gets to a particular point. And it's up to the rest of the people who are paying attention to contribute and to take it from there and say, okay, this is where we're going now. But I think what you see in hacktivism, in the hacker community, you see a lot of young people, because they question a lot. And that's why people are so annoyed by getting all these questions from your kids, from your students, from people who are basically asking you to explain yourself and aren't aware of all of the rules and why they're in place. And we see that all the time. There are so many instances I can think of where we ask, why does this work this way? Or can you share this bit of technological knowledge? And the answer is, there's only one purpose to having this, and that's to do something evil. So we're not going to tell you what this particular program does, or how this software works, or allow you to build this piece of hardware, because we can only think of one use, and that is negative, that is something that affects our control. And that is what people are rebelling against. That is what we see on so many different platforms. And I think that's a major part of the entire hacktivism movement, is that questioning, is that not just accepting an answer because they're told to accept the answer. We've seen people rebelling against that for a long, long time, but now we see a lot more networking going on through social media and a lot more powerful tools.
Okay. Do you, I'm sure you're itching to get in. Why don't you go ahead? I mean, and then we'll get a few questions in or something.
I'll
you must be itching.
go
ahead.
Briefly. Is that okay?
Yeah.
People hear me? I mean, absolutely. There is. I want to first say that there's very much this temperament in existence that's culturally valued and instantiated in a very deep way. I mean, one of the things that I've written quite a bit about is hacker humor, which is not inherently political, but I was really kind of shocked when I started to work with hackers, just how willing they were to embed jokes into software, how they were willing to interrupt speakers to crack a joke, right? So it's not just the speaker who's giving a joke, a hacker will interrupt, and I was just blown away. And I think it really captures this crafty sensibility, which really connects also. I mean, again, not all hacking is technical, but a lot of hackers are working with technology, and they've got material constraints, right? And they want to outwit the constraints, and they can't fully outwit the constraints, but they will outwit them as much as they can, which I think connects to just so many of the different issues that Simona brought up and Emmanuel brought up already. Working within the actual kind of conditions for the possible, but through that path you'll do everything possible to hack what you can hack and also accept what you cannot hack at the same time. But I just want to give a sense of just how culturally valued that is and how it's instantiated in everything from joking to the political expression of hacker politics. And then I just want to briefly say something about successes, right? I mean, I think in some ways the comments given show that in certain respects a lot of hacker interventions, whether it is, again, creating one of the only fully functional anonymity networks, Tor, which a lot of activists use in many different parts of the world to get information out there, right? It is really a valuable resource that's in operation that has helped many social movements, right? It's kind of resource-driven to LibGen or Memory of the World, right? These have been really impactful. In places like the United States, I would say hacker politics mirrors many other forms of left or progressive politics. There's a kind of attempt and desire for change, but there's a lot of failed projects, not because they're inherently bad projects, but it's very, very difficult to change things in the United States right now as well, right? So there's a way in which, while there's some definite unique aspects to hacker politics, such as that kind of, turn to hack the system within the constraints or the creation of resources, I would also say that some forms of hacker politics also mirror the possibilities of what is possible in different regions as well.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thanks. Simona, did you want to jump in?
Very, very shortly. Often when we speak about breaking rules or not breaking rules, for me, the hacker perspective, with technology or without technology, is around solving a problem, a very concrete problem. Whatever is the problem, can be putting in jail a banker, but can also be doing a good joke, a very good joke. And so in the way of solving a very concrete problem, you might have to break a rule, or you might have to build a rule. For example, in the case of the Indignado movement, since the state were not solving the social problem, we were building the rule. So it's not really in the core of sometimes yes, but in the core is the idea of solving the problem because of questioning and asking why. So first you decide the problem you want to choose, you want to solve, and then you ask why all the way through. And if to respond to why or to solve the problem you have to break a rule, is just part of the solving the problem. And as Gabriella was saying, that many problems and many new rules needed for the transformation towards the future are built in like Tor and many other solutions and new rules that they are pushing away the old rules, amending the old rules. That's all.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So so maybe we need to kind of rethink this. Maybe it's not. I mean, what you're suggesting, maybe it's not rule breaking as an ideal in itself, but a willingness or something, or a maybe. I mean, and Gabriella had started with a comfort with maybe. Okay, so let's open it up to questions and thoughts, and I'm going to pass around this mic. It might not work. I don't know. We'll see. I'll turn you guys so that you can see a little bit more. Here we go. Michael Harris.
Hi. All right. Just want to make it.
Doesn't like you either.
I want to make just a couple of points and see where they go. First, the hacker as a literary figure, as an archetype, was available before there were any hackers, and I assume I have this is very disorderly. It's said that computer people, tech people, read a lot of science fiction and comics. Sorry? Should I just talk?
Yes.
All right.
We got another one.
Just talk loud.
All right. So yeah.
I'll stand here.
Right. So the persona of the hacker pre-exists. I'm trying to say actual phenomenon, and in fact, it's a very old literary archetype, and it's recycled through comic books and science fiction, which, at least according to the stereotype, is something that tech people read a lot of, consume a lot of. And so it's not at all clear. Of course, this is generally a sympathetic figure, sometimes maybe a hero or an anti-hero. It's not, to me, it's not clear whether this persona is more hospitable to the kinds of people, the kinds of hackers who've been represented on this panel, people who are interested in social justice questions, or the obnoxious types like Weave, who shows up in the very first chapter of Gabriella's book, when I just discovered that he's hiding out in Transnistria and is identified as a neo-Nazi in the recent issue of Atlantic. It's not at all clear to me whether which is more typical of the, or which figure, which kind of hacker, the ecology of the internet is more hospitable. That's the first point. Second point, and this is a reaction to Simona Levi's comment. It's part of a polemic against, one side of a polemic against some unnamed leftists, mostly unnamed leftists, who are arguing that the internet is alienating, and I don't know the whole story, but it's undoubtedly true that the internet is necessary for contemporary life. But on the other hand, the most visible manifestations of the internet are not only clearly alienating, but they're alienating in the most classic way. If you think about Facebook, Facebook is designed to format its product, its commodity, and the commodity is the user. And it is the way Facebook is formatting its users is quite visible in its impact on contemporary culture. Facebook or Instagram, and just the habits of people who use them are visibly evolving under the influence of this. And I have no doubt that this is also one of the reasons it's been so easy to collect information, because people are conforming to the boxes into which they're being designed. So those are the questions I'm asking.
Okay, good. Charles, one, Jim, and then let's give it a shot. See if it works.
Well, now I'm worried. Does this?
Go for it.
Okay, we're good.
All right.
So I kind of want to talk. Well, I guess I'm a bit of a pessimist when it comes to a lot of the things that emerged in the readings and this discussion about the direction of hacker culture, and in particular about its intersection with left-wing politics. This is coming from the 6 or so years I spent working in tech, mostly as a software engineer in Silicon Valley, where I worked for a while down the street from Coinbase, the big Bitcoin startup, and so was exposed to a lot of the cryptocurrency, right, libertarian kind of fervor, I guess, and there was a sense on the ground that this was infecting not just the corporate side of coding and computer engineering, but also the idea of who could and ought to hack, who ought to be the person or the people questioning the rules that organize these systems and finding ways to open doors that maybe they shouldn't have. So yeah, I guess I want to push back against or question the characterization of hacking as a leftist pursuit, especially nowadays. I appreciate the history of it, but I guess anecdotally, it seems like there is a big push from the right to sort of co-opt these tools.
Okay, so Gabriella wants to jump in, so go for it and while I move,
Okay.
while I move the mic.
I'll try to keep it brief. I mean, first of all, there are absolutely like super hacker capitalists now and in the past as well. And I would say, like, again, Silicon Valley is particularly important in this story. And I would actually even say that it's not particularly new either, even though a little bit like, I do think that there has been a more accentuated kind of leftist hacker politics both in Europe and in the United States, as well as a more robust presence of the hacker in the geopolitical sphere with groups like WikiLeaks or you know, the whistle blowing at the hands of Snowden and Manning. Like we have seen a kind of political thickening, but that doesn't mean that there's a diminishment of hackers working in the capitalist sphere, especially in the United States. And again, Silicon Valley currently and historically have been hotbeds of this activity. And today it's really, you know, aligned with everything from companies like Facebook or Google, and also cryptocurrency fever. And historically too, for example, the Homebrew Club, which was a kind of association of hackers who met to talk about hardware, and they shared schematics, right? Many of those hackers went on to found you know, companies like Apple and other PC companies. So there's always been a trajectory of hackers that have really been part of the economy. I haven't tended to write about them, and I would never want to say that the political hacker means that those other hackers don't exist, right? In fact, part of my own work is to make sure that there's a visible paradigm and template for younger hackers to know that, hey, they could be part of this community or they could be part of that community, right? Which is why it's so important, and sometimes like some individuals who only experience the hacker scene, let's just say in Silicon Valley, I go, oh, you know, go to 2600, go to Hackers on Planet Earth. You'll get a very different vibe. Go to the Chaos Computer Club. You'll get a very different vibe, right? And this is, again, not to say that the existence of one and its robustness means that the other scene is not also robust, right? And so I just kind of wanted to make that clear.
Thanks, Gabriella. I mean, this does raise though this question. Before we get to you, Jim, it does raise this question about like, what are we of categories? Like, what is the right category here? In other words, is hacker the right category, or maybe it's just like it's too big a category because it has these different ecosystems within it, and so we need to maybe think about, I don't know, a particular community, a particular political community that you know, has these particular resistance sensibilities and political sensibilities, and then is technologically savvy and using technology, right? Rather than thinking about it in terms of kind of technology first. I mean, in other words, maybe the technology is secondary somehow, even though we tend to think of it as primary in an odd way. Right? Secondary in an odd way. You want to say something? I'm sorry. Yeah. Go ahead, and then we'll go to Jim.
Broken this mic yet, I don't think. But
yeah,
I maintain that hackers come from all different walks of life. There are conservative hackers, there are fascist hackers, there are all kinds of hackers. But I think hacktivism as a tactic has left this bent, only because people on the left are used to it. They participate in sit-ins and civil disobedience. You don't see people on the right doing that, at least not nearly as much. And I think that's why when those worlds merge, activism and hacking, it tends to attract the people who embrace that particular tactic that could change. But for now, I see hacktivism as something that is used more by those particular campaigns.
Well, this sort of this sort of dovetails with what Bernard just said. I'm sort of curious, Emmanuel, to get your take on how the independent media movement, IMC movement, has evolved, which you were very supportive of in New York City, in particular, for quite a long time. And secondly, the issue of LibGen. LibGen is a massive piratical attack on Amazon. They took 2 million titles from Amazon and started, that's the basis of LibGen. And I was wondering if the commentator could talk a little bit more about that, because that's an amazing example of hacktivism, if you will.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Let's get another comment in. Yeah, go ahead.
Right, so this has also been touched on.
Is it working? Try it again. Give it a knock. Hit at the top. Hit the top for a sec. It's not. It doesn't make
this has been touched on already by a bunch of people, but I kind of wanted to talk again a little bit about the demographics of hackers and just the way that that's going to affect the future of hacking. At least in the internet spaces that I've been a part of, it has been overwhelmingly white and overwhelmingly male, and overwhelmingly middle class. And also generally people from the global north rather than the global south. And so I'm just wondering, in terms of the kind of hacking that's going to happen, is it more likely to be about issues that are affecting those groups and not so much other groups, for example, people in the global south that might benefit from hacking schemes? And then the second question, I guess, is about cyberspace as a side of kind of neocolonialism. I'm kind of thinking that for example, now a lot of my family in Nigeria, for example, they're on Facebook and YouTube, which are all sites that are created in the global north, and I think that kind of comes with a lot of complications.
Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in at this point? Yeah? Okay. Let's try.
This is really fascinating for me as a historian, because I see some resonance with other parts of history. And one thing that I wanted to comment and ask a question on is, does the word vigilante ever come up in this area? Because it reminds me, you were talking about rule breaking or not, but part of what hacktivism seems to be getting at is to cast light on the 1% rule breaking, right? And that calls to mind vigilante justice. And what's interesting about that historians from revolutionary America to 20th century historians have shed light on, is that vigilante justice does have its own set of norms. There's a pluralism in terms of legal norms, and they might not be rules or laws, but there's a shared norm that people understand what types of vigilante justice is not okay and what types of vigilante justice is okay. So I guess a further question along this line, if you look at it from this larger historical perspective, is, are there norms that are coming up in this, as this hacktivism world is developing? Who gets to make those norms? Who disciplines, who self-disciplines this world? So those are some of the questions that came to my mind.
Great, yeah, thanks. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
So to kind of follow on that, I was just thinking about a special case being Iran, and then thinking about if we're to consider politics and hackers, and then thinking about this craftiness and this relationship with the law. Seems to me, especially in that case, like the international law is something very specific, and the nation states law creates some very different relationships. And on one side, you can have the state's army of hackers that work on the international level, and the other, I think about like the legacy of the Green Revolution and the culture of like the nation state's insane rules on controlling spaces like social media, and how the everyday breaking of these rules and like popular hackers and different systems and international conversations, they have to find VPNs and like the constant breaking of these. But also to think that their politics are much more concerned with the nation state front. So they might be using Facebook or Twitter and much less be much less concerned with like the international meaning or whether these are recolonization. It seems to me that this, especially at this moment where we talk a lot about the armies of hackers and the other side of it. It seems to me it's important to think about this technology in different ways it's controlled and the refusal of this controlling. Whether we considering it as, on a global level and politics on a global level, or we say like what are our localities.
Great, thanks, Jan. Manan, some of the questions were addressed your way, so why don't you kick us off a little bit?
Sure. So maybe I'll start here with the question of I mean, some of the sort of the Green Revolution of Tahrir Square, some of these social movements depended heavily on social media tools that had to be hacked outside of the way that they are supposed to be used. And the activists that I was involved with in that sense, you had to know the infrastructure of the device and of the network in order to create other possibilities of dissemination and resistance. So I think that does complicate the question that was asked here about the sort of neo-coloniality of Facebook, which has become sort of in certain cases the primary internet provider, especially on sort of low bandwidth devices. And more the question of bandwidth, sort of vertical bandwidth, is in conversation with a sort of state tyranny in terms of these, and of course, sort of, let's not forget, sort of corporate tyranny in terms of that. And I think the sort of lessons we can kind of collect from since 2009 onwards is that the question of hacktivism intersects with social engineering much more than it does with sort of phreaking and sort of breaking in and DDoS and those. So it's really about, I think, the activism part of the hacktivism. And so that allows for actually differentiated politics to emerge, even if these are corporatized spaces, or in case of Pakistan, Egypt, Iran, state tyrannical infrastructure that censors and there's an anthropologist whose talk I heard a few years ago about sort of resistance movements for free speech in China, where offline dissemination of leaflets led you to different sort of apps through which you could communicate for a very small period of time before kind of the army of censors kind of clicked in. And it was always a moving target. It was just necessarily a moving target. And that's something we've seen in the Pakistani case with WhatsApp specifically, moving channels through. And so the LibGen question was really about sort of the impact of this enormous data that is put. LibGen is now only accessible through VPN in certain parts of South Asia. You can't access it anymore because it's been blocked. And the capacity for, I think it's one of the greatest success stories of hacktivism, if not the greatest story. LibGen and Sci-Hub together. And the amount of knowledge that they have put under global public domain is incomprehensible. I mean, I was a professor in Berlin for 4 years, and in Free University, so a very privileged space, and almost 99% of the stuff I did and taught came through LibGen, because the infrastructure for checking out a book from the library was above my pay grade. So those are real success stories, and I think that does allow for new types of, and now a lot of this movement have moved into Facebook groups, closed groups on Facebook where PDFs are exchanged. I understand the Cambridge Analytics space and what's happening with it in the United States and other places with electioneering. But Facebook, for those of us who are kind of logged into other parts, I'm not on Facebook, but they're being used to exchange, materials that feed directly into that.
Simona, I
Yeah.
know it's very late there, but do you want to jump in?
I miss a couple of interventions, but I'd like to add something about the alienation that was asked just in the beginning.
Okay, good.
I missed not because I fell asleep, because of the bad noise.
Yeah, I know, it must be hard.
I just want to be precise. Because yes, I brought this piece on this because we are having a very bad problem on that. Because it's true that the hacking, it's more, at least in Spain, I'm not sure that is more accepted, this idea of hacking from the left. In fact, I think that the right, the more liberal part of the political sphere understand better the technology and even the good of hacking than on the left. I think that the discourse of the left, this kind of ecological idea that and to be against the machine is always good, is giving us a lot of problem. I think alienation is the capitalistic system. If you have to work 14 hours a day on something you don't like and then you have very little time left for your own life, you are alienated with internet or without the internet. So the problem is not, it cannot be the internet. And in my point of view, I know also as a female point of view, once again, I was always a big mouth since very little, but to speak in an assembly, it was much harder than now if I have to make a big flame and trolling in a list from my sofa where I am here with my pajama and being a girl, it's much more easy. So I think internet have alienated someone, but have given opportunity to speak and to get organized much more than what it could have possibly alienate. And the people that get alienated by the machine, they would be probably get alienated by anything else. It's just a mean of their alienation. It's not the object of their alienation, the internet. And I say this because all the cut down of freedom of expression that is happening in Spain right now are done by the government from the right, but the ground for it is done by this philosophy of the left that, here I can put something against Podemos. It's a very good occasion. For example, Podemos have put is very proud of his new drug plan, even in the city ruled by Podemos, like is Barcelona. I like very much Ada Colau, the mayor, which is a girl and a good friend of mine, but they have put, they have a new plan against drug, and they put internet together with the other drugs. So it's like if when you are when the printing press it was born, that you put the books as a drug. So it's absolutely problematic because you are doing the work then for Inquisition. So okay, internet can alienate, but in this right moment, internet is in danger. So anyone who says something nasty about the internet publicly is the enemy. You can say nasty thing about the internet privately, but publicly you cannot. You are the enemy.
Okay, we'll remember that. Okay, Gabriella, Emmanuel. Gabriella, you want to jump in, and then we'll come back to you?
Sure. I mean, maybe just very briefly, because there are so many great questions, and I know we're not getting at all of them, so I'll just maybe address the question around demographics a little bit, which was raised, right?
Okay.
And, obviously in much of the world, there is a male slant to the hacker world. And that's something that hackers themselves, in certain quarters, for example, the open source community has been very concerned about this. I would say the security community a little bit less so. The open source world had their Me Too movement last year, I won't go into the details before the big one kind of happens. Interestingly enough, I think if you really widen the scope, you see that there's some interesting other forms of diversity. There is a lot of transgender hackers, actually, more than I've come across in academia, way, way more. I also think that it's really important also to open the kind of global aperture, which we got a little bit today too, but for example, with Hacktivism, probably one of the most successful hacktivist groups is Red Hack in Turkey, which is a Leninist Marxist organization that has been around for 16 years, and they've done a lot of direct action hacking, for example, hacking into the energy company and deleting people's debts. They've worked with social movements in different places. And these are histories that are hidden because they haven't been really studied. It's really been more the European and English speaking world and a little bit of the Brazilian hacking scene, which is also incredibly important and incredibly vibrant. So we need definitely a lot more people who are looking internationally, because I would say that there's some really, really important things going on. But there's been a kind of myopia towards the more English European sort of scene.
Thanks, Gabriella. I've got a question, but I want to hear from you first, and also might address the vigilante justice question.
Okay.
But go ahead.
I like this mic better.
Yeah, you like that one?
This
figured it
one
out.
hasn't given me any problems yet.
Oh, okay.
Yes, I echo what Biela is saying about representation, about how this particular community reflects some of the same issues that are out there in the security world and software development, and it's changing. It's not changing fast enough, you know, to satisfy me and a lot of people, but it is changing, and I think we need to be as welcoming and as open to that as possible. There's mention of the Hope Conference before, which we're doing this July in New York City, and it's a great feeling when we see the amount of female participation, the transgender community being a major part of it, and seeing this developing on its own is just something that fills me with pride, knowing that this community is it's moving faster than society, that's for sure. It doesn't necessarily mean that it's moving fast enough, and there's all kinds of things we can do to make sure that this does not continue to be dominated by one particular ethnicity or sex. And of course that goes to representation in other parts of the world as well. What we try to do, we have what are known as 2,600 meetings, first Friday of every month, in basically any place that wants to have one, and all that is people getting together in their city, at their mall, and just kind of trading information, playing with computers, showing off new technology. Absolutely no requirements of any sort, no membership of any sort. We need more things that bring people together where they are running the show. It's very important, and it's tricky to get this right, but we just have to be open to suggestions and new ways of doing things, just like everything in the hacker world is.
Thanks. I'll try that mic then.
Good mic.
So you like a good mic? Okay, good mic. So open it up for a short, at least a few short questions. But before I do, here's some kind of a hypothesis, or not a hypothesis, but maybe a question or something. But because I'm really just trying to get at this. I'm really trying to get at this question of whether hacker/hacktivism is a modality of revolt or something. I mean, one question would be, what is the priority of the technological over the political? And obviously, this is probably asking for too much rationality in the causation, along causation lines, and obviously there are probably too many variations in any event, so it would be impossible to come up with a causal hypothesis. But I have to think that you've got to be first technologically savvy / some kind of a tech coder person first, to then be to then have a vulnerability or a susceptibility to becoming a hacker, right? In other words, I couldn't be a hacker.
Not true.
Well, no, I mean, no, it is not true. Thank you. But I mean, I would need to, there's like, I'm very politically engaged and involved. I do a lot, but I'd have to like spend a lot of guys. Can learn. I mean, I'll start coming on your Fridays. Teach me. That's fine. But I mean, it's just like it's not. I'm not. That's the pathway. There's a little bit of a barrier to entry. There's a little bit of a whatever. But I've learned how to do ordinary least squares analysis. I should be able to code too, right? But it's not. It's like so. But when we think hacker, we think someone who generally has coding abilities or something, and then it becomes a question. No, you're saying no. I know, but
I can't code my way out of a paper bag.
Really?
Not a coder.
But then, but so because I want to say that it's like there's going to be political ecosystems within a certain space, that I don't know, what is the priority here? In other words, how does it work? In other words, so
Can I jump in? Obviously, okay. First, I'm going to start with academics, right? Like, you're an academic, I'm an academic, there's others, and many of us are political. And you know what? Many of us engage in non-academic forms of political action, but many of us express our politics through writing books, because that's what we do as an academic, right? And I would say it's very similar with hackers. Like, a lot of hackers are good at coding and technology, tend to create an infrastructure like Tor. I mean, it's crazy. Today I was doing some interviews with Tor people, and the founders were like, yeah, we knew that in theory anonymity as a network was possible, but no one was doing it. So we decided we'd start doing it, and eventually, once it existed, we hoped others would take part. So they've got those skills, and they channel it towards a goal, a problem that they want to solve, right? But then, again, different political hacker groups or different hackers who are political then do channel their skills, again, some of which are not technological. Simona is part of the hacker scene, and she doesn't work with technology, but she takes the methodologies, and then it's very much directed at, jailing bankers. In Italy, I was just at a squat where a bunch of hackers were having a meeting, their pre-meeting for their yearly hacker meeting. They're all uber political anarchists, anti-capitalists. So their kind of orientation is around anti-capitalism. Whereas with Tor, it's around civil liberties and privacy. Others get involved in the law in very direct ways. So I think that there is an interesting question as to the fact that I do think, and I think it was really, really put so well by Simona, like, let's solve a problem. It's very problem-solving oriented, get stuff done. But then the different pathways that hackers take have as much to do with where they're located, Italy in an anti-capitalist anarchist scene versus a more kind of liberal context of the United States, right? And so there's not a kind of determining factor, even if there are some repeating patterns of problem solving and the creation of resources, and the releasing of information, which you do see pretty consistently.
But I have to say that so Simona, you seem like an instrumental hacker, or like for you it sounds as if within the projects, within your political project, it's a kind of like an instrumental thing. It's like you're trying to solve a problem. You got this, you got that, and then bingo. Well, if somebody can hack the system and get that information, and then we can leak it, then that is a piece of the puzzle. That's one model, but it's not the only model, right? Because it is very instrumental. There's also, the other model is something about like the original, the phone beep thing, right? It's like or some of the early worms or something, which it seems as if it wasn't as instrumental to a political project. It was a mode of behavior that ended up having a political dimension to it, but it was the behavior itself that was generating what then becomes the hack or something like that, right?
Yeah, I would say that you don't need to be technologically adept particularly. What you need is that passion for technology. You need that appreciation, that respect. When you have that, then you can basically apply that to any other interest that you might have. There are people who know a lot about phones, know nothing about computers, vice versa. People who are into social issues, other people who are just into using computers and technology to get the best job out there. But without that passion for technology, it's hard to apply that to activism and to become a hacktivist as a result, because you need to know where to apply this particular skill, whether or not you have that skill. Just being able to understand what the possibilities are, what the potential is. I think that is really the key before you can move on and actually think about, okay, where can this technology be used in a socially responsible way, in a way to change an injustice. So you can't just hop into it. And as far as becoming a hacker, that's really anyone who questions. That's really anyone who just doesn't accept the rules. A good reporter is by default a hacker because that's what they do. They ask a lot of questions. They don't believe what they're told. They look for ways around things, and they share information with anybody who will listen. That is what a hacker does. The skill is certainly an important part, but the mindset is something that does not require you to be a coding expert or a particular expert on anything else in the hacker world. It's about that passion. It's about that respect.
Mm-hmm. So I want to resist a little bit that, I want to resist a little, yeah, there you go. The hacker mindset. No, I want to resist the idea, I like the idea that there is a mindset, and similarly I like Manan's idea of kind of the anti-colonial struggle as reflecting a hacker mindset. But yes, there's certain ways of thinking. I think that's right. So there's probably a hacker mentality or way of being, way of thinking that has certain traits that we can then see in different contexts, and that we could then say, oh, that's a hacker, that is a even though they're not even coding, even though they're not even technologically savvy, that there's that mindset. But I want to buy that, but I also want to resist the idea that would be hacker or hacktivism, because I want to say, yeah, okay, so there is a mindset, but you can't go so broad. So I don't want to. I would say no. A journalist is a journalist. They're probably journalists who are. Who have a very, well, all journalists should have that, right? Otherwise they're hacks.
In my case, for example, I have a hacker mentality, but no time to learn technology. So I live since 16 years, live in the political sense with my girlfriend in the political sense, Madish, which is in charge of learning technology. So we are an hacker group. I cannot live without not madish, literally. And she cannot live without me. So we are together, we are an hacker.
Right.
But,
Yeah. Okay, Gabriella, jump in. Yeah.
so we are an hacker group, but we are an hacker group, but we are not all hackers. But we cannot get apart because if not, there is no hacker group anymore.
Okay.
Also, I would say that sensibility is craftiness, right? And I've thought a lot about craftiness, and craftiness is something that journalists, lawyers, and academics all have. It's just in the hacker world, it's prioritized. It's really prioritized, and it's very, again, valued. It's practiced. There's odes to it. It exists everywhere. And just because you're crafty doesn't mean that you are then going to be political. It just means that craftiness does show up in their politics in some interesting ways. I mean, the Copyleft is frickin' crafty. I mean, it's brilliant to use copyright to disable copyright. That's a really crafty intervention. Or when Phil Zimmerman released Pretty Good Privacy, the source code to the encryption program, he was breaking all sorts of laws by doing so. Munition law, patent law, and I think it was actually Evan Moglen, who's very hackish. He's a lawyer, a law professor, but is very hackish. He came up with the idea of let's print the PGP source code in a book with MIT Press, and all of a sudden we're not breaking the law because it's in a book, right? And so I think you can trace, not in all instances, but in many instances, this drive, this mentality to craftiness, which again I would say exists in all sorts of fields. It's just kind of prioritized in the hacker sphere. And then just one last point. I mean, I do think that there's a homology or good resonance between the journalistic world and the hacker world, which is why they've intersected so profoundly in the last few years, whether it's WikiLeaks or hackers working at the New York Times providing security. I mean, these are both professions. Hackers are not quite a profession, but that are really committed to civil liberties and speaking out. And so there is an overlap, there is a homology. The reason why they're different is there's different sociological scenes, right? So the journalists go to their conferences, they have their publications, the hackers go to Hackers on Planet Earth, they see each other at events, right? So the difference has as much to do with the kind of sociological scene, even though, again, I do think there are some similarities between those kind of worlds.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to imagine good journalism that isn't a form of hacking, probably, right? In other words, so all of the good journalism that we want is getting stuff that, I mean, finding a way in to get information that we can then disseminate in some way on that model. Okay, so it's time for last thoughts, but before we go, last thought.
So I was listening and I was thinking, maybe, so what I sense is that there are different routes to hacktivism or the culture of being a hacker. There is probably this political activist who sees in hacktivism a mode of political, like an opportunity to be politically engaged. And then there is a hacker who's also like politically motivated, so they take it into that route. But I think what I sense from your thought, and it was also where I was headed, is the the mid-20s, just normal, technologically savvy person who gets deep into that, programming or like hacker culture, and then all of a sudden turns into a political, like engages in political activism some way or another. And I was thinking, is there something inherently, and I know we're not trying to like essentialize, that kind of, hacker, but is there anything like essentially, politically empowering about, that kind of, the power grabbing of being, the rule-breaking moment of like someone, getting on the other side of the table, feeling that they're really onto some kind of like empowering tool, that kind of like triggers some sort of, political like sensation or inclination or like opening, and how do we think, like, because in my mind also the prototype of a hacker is a mid like 20s, 30s, someone who's like sitting in a room just like programming, not, but all of a sudden feeling empowered and feeling happy to help, happy to do something good, not necessarily like fully like a full-time political activist, but someone who's
Right.
who knows that they can do something and want to do something, become politically engaged in that sense.
Right. Thanks. Yeah. And I mean, this brings to mind a lot of the literature about kind of political engagement and the way in which kind of it can be transformative, right? So in the same way in which kind of maybe that experience of being able to hack might be transformative, right? Okay, so let's have some final thoughts. Actually, we're going to be final. Quick thoughts. Manan, would you also want to make a final thought? You're good.
Okay. Well, basically, I think we're living in a really, really interesting time. I think we're seeing a lot of change, a lot of empowerment, a lot of people realizing they have a voice when they thought they had none. As long as there's technology, as long as there are issues, technology is going to be used to try and deal with those issues. The technology is simply a tool, and whoever holds the skills in using that tool will be the one benefiting the most. And fortunately right now, the people with that mastery are the creative types, morally conscious people who are used to fighting against the odds, being more idealistic than the mainstream is used to. That could change. It's not likely, but that could change. Those with massive amounts of power tend not to be skilled in subverting the system. And I think that subversion, that's what's essential in any movement of resistance.
Great, thank you. Thanks. Any last thoughts, Simona? It's late, I know.
Just I've spent a very pleasant night with all of you, and I hope we do it more often.
Me too. Merci. Gabriella?
Sure, I'll speak to the last question,
Okay.
Because I think that's a good way to kind of wrap up. I mean, it was very depressing when I read a kind of biographical account of Mark Zuckerberg by Stephen Levy, because I was like, ooh, he kind of is very hackish in terms of his biography and history. He was always playing with computers, and he was very precocious, and he was thinking outside the box. And, for him, it was very empowering, and then he went on to build this, like, horrible Facebook empire, right, that we all know is a problem. And so, I think that there is, while I think there has historically been a lot of hackers who have had that questioning drive and they push against the status quo, I still think it's incredibly important to have robust political communities who are fighting for privacy, who are fighting against bankers, who are fighting for social justice, who can go to conferences like HOPE, so that those skills, which are very powerful, and can be used really for good and for bad, or can just be wasted as well. I think in order for them to be channeled in positive ways, you need to have robust social themes, where there's examples, like the examples of XNET and Simona in 2600, in order to channel those skills and that kind of questioning to kind of positive places. So that's where I would end.
All right, well, that seems like a good place to end. Except that the next thing is to thank our panelists. Thank you so much. And to thank Anna for all the work making this happen. Anna's going to kill me, but it's actually her birthday tonight, so you can wish her happy birthday, too. And also, this is the first time since we've been here that we now all can say that you've been admitted to the PhD program in English, and so you're going to stay at Columbia in the PhD program in English. And so hopefully Anna will be a student in the seminar next year, right? Okay, what was I going to say? Next thing, so the next one is on standing ground, standing rock. And we've got a terrific lineup, so I hope you'll join us. It's April 12th? Yes, April 12th, okay? All right, thank you so much, and see you soon. Take care.